Our historical documentary is going to be covering the years 1840 to 1849. This decade had many key events, significant technology advancements, and important news that we're going to be sharing with you in timeline-esque style in around 8 to 10 minutes. Starting off in 1840, the first key event has already taken place. The first postage stamp, founded by Sir Rowland Hill in England, included a standard price for sending a letter. Prior to this, the person who received the letter paid how much was depending on the weight and distance traveled. In 1840, the first stamp issued, which featured a black and white portrait of Queen Victoria, costed 1 penny, more often referred to as the penny black. This was huge, not only for starting postal services that are still in effect today, like USPS and FedEx, but also a key advancement into how we monetize mail today. Meanwhile, in Afghan, in 1841, the First Afghan War took place. The British Army's occupation of Kabul and other areas was set off by a number of difficulties that were started by the insurrection. The insurrection followed after a stoppage of subsidies that were paid off to the tribal chiefs in Afghan. Alexander Burnes, the British political agent, was murdered in November and the embassy was overrun by Ghilzais. Sir William Macnaghten, the senior British envoy, was killed in December. This war, however, did not end in the 40s and was actually put on hold until the 70s by a treaty called the Treaty of Gandamak, in which the British would take result of victory, however not take any of Afghan's land. Going into 1842, Britain has their eyes on another country in Asia, Hong Kong. Hong Kong Island was handed to Britain by China in 1842's Treaty of Nanking, although it was not until after the Second Opium War that the European government gained a larger part of the harbor. The First Opium War had made it an important port to British merchants, and it was appointed a crown dependency. Hong Kong was, in the treaty, ceded to Britain in perpetuity, but in 1997, Hong Kong was handed back to China and went back to Chinese rule. The United States, while still a relatively new country, was focused on improving their standards and laws in 1842, starting with Massachusetts' child employment laws. Massachusetts became the first state to pass laws limiting how many hours a child laborer could be forced to work. The new laws limited a child under the age of 12's workday to be a maximum of 10 hours, and only 4 days a week could they work. This is a huge difference from child labor laws today. However, it was a great step towards making America a more child friendly and, quite frankly, perfect capitalist state. In 1843, perhaps one of the most iconic video games was created, before there was video games. The Oregon Trail, the first wagon train, was the wave of migration that started in 1843 and followed John Bidwell's 1841 train and Elijah White's 1842 expedition to Oregon. The 1843 wagon train was composed of about 900 people. Bidwell's immigrants had been split on going to California and Oregon. The definition of this as the first wagon train made up the number of participants. The earlier ones had only been small expeditionary groups. However, this one really paved the way for pilgrimage and moving out west in the US. In 1844, we had our first technological advancement, Morse's first electronic telegram. Samuel Morse had created an electromagnetic telegraph in 1836, and he had written code that was to be transferred on it. Morse code uses dots, dashes, spaces to represent the letters of the alphabet. The US government had requested a line be built between Baltimore and Washington, and it sent its first message on May 24th, 1844. The code can also represent numbers. This was huge for communication, paving the way for telephones, telegraphs, faxes, pretty much any kind of long distance communication started here. And that is a huge discovery. 1845 was a big year for the US. To start things off, the U.S. Naval Academy of Annapolis was founded in 1845 for officers of the U.S. and Navy Marines. It was started by the Secretary of the U.S. Navy, George Bancroft, who had moved to the Philadelphia Naval Asylum School to what had been the Army's Fort Severn. The first class of the Naval Academy consisted of 50 midshipmen. Following that, there was 2 new states added to the USA, the 27th being Florida. On March 3rd, 1845, Florida became the 27th state of the U.S., and at that time, Florida was known mostly for its cotton plantations and its gold resources, and the hot climate that suited those cotton plantations well. Following that, still in the South, Texas became the 28th state of the United States of America. Texas, after gaining independence from Mexico in 1836, became the largest state in the contiguous United States in 1845. Texas, mostly known for again its hot climate, quickly became one of the more populated states despite its new forthcoming. 1846 was another huge year for the US's development. Along with adding the 29th state, Iowa, formerly part of the French-controlled Louisiana, became part of the United States following the Louisiana Purchase in 1803, became a territory of Iowa in 1833, and a U.S. state in 1846. The Mexican War followed shortly after. After Texas became a U.S. state of the year before, the United States and Mexico go to war over the disputed area. American forces invade and conquer New Mexico, California, and other parts of northern Mexico. Another American army captured Mexico City, forcing Mexico to agree to the sale of its northern territories in the U.S. for $15 million. Following that, in the U.S., the first official game of baseball took place. The first official game played under the New York Knickerbockers Baseball Club, now known as the New York Knicks, was on June 19, 1846, in Hoboken, New Jersey, between the Knickerbockers and the New York Baseball Club, with the Knickerbockers losing 23-1. The next year, huge scientific discoveries took place. In 1847, chloroform, used as a general anesthetic, was used. Obstetrician James Young Simpson first used chloroform for general anesthesia during childbirth. Prominent churchmen objected and used, quote, Genesis, God intended woman to suffer pain during childbirth. But the next year, when giving birth to her seventh child, Queen Victoria asked for chloroform to ease her labor pains. Chloroform went on to be used during the surgery around the world. That, however, is not the end of scientific discoveries that year. Antiseptic use in hospital also began to start. Surgeon Joseph Lister begins cleaning wounds, surgical equipment, and insists his surgical team clean hands with carbolic acid prior to operating. The number of patients who then become infected decreased considerably, and the process was adopted around the world, revolutionizing medical care. 1848 was another big year for the U.S. with the start of the California Gold Rush. It was James Marshall that found the first nugget on January 30th, 1848 at Coloma. His find was to draw 500,000 people to California, and his initial discovery meant that other prospectors were able to uncover beds of Trinity and Feather rivers. The gold rush is said to have taken place between 1848 and 1855, and is arguably one of the biggest events in the U.S.'s history. Following that, Wisconsin became the 30th state of the United States of America. Wisconsin Territory was organized in 1836 and gained statehood in 1848. Wisconsin today is mostly known for their dairy products and rich farms and pastures. In 1849, the biggest event was Hungary splitting from Austria. Engels described the revolutionary struggle of 1848 and 1849 as an act of terrorism by the Austrian government, and a degree of oppression was forced on the Hungarians. His criticism of the Habsburgs is on par for the course, and their beating of the Magyars only served as an inspiration to the other revolutionaries. Friedrich Metternich, the Czechs, Poles, Moravians, Slovaks, Magyars, Lutherans, Romanians, Illyrians, Serbs, and Croats were starting to see a degree of freedom in which they started attacking each other, all in Central Europe. The masses went to Budapest and pushed Austrians for reform. With the threat of revolution looming, the Austrian governors had no choice but to accept Hungarian demands. The House of Habsburg was dethroned, and in an era of excitement, the First Republic of Hungary was born. After the revolutionary was suppressed, the Austrian emperor settled everything down, and their advisors went on to manipulate the Croatian, Serbian, and Romanian peasantry into revolt against the Hungarian government.